Thank you. Welcome. Did I hear I'm the last session of the morning? That's a tough slot to be in. Okay, I don't know if that's good or bad. I don't know what that represents. But anyway, let's get down to it. So my name is Christopher Strand. I'm the Chief Risk Officer at Cybersixgill. And we're going to talk about and by the way, thanks for coming to my hometown. I really appreciate that as well. So let's get into what we're going to talk about here. So threats from the dark side. So this is going to be a dark web tour, but when we mention the dark web, many different inclinations come to people's minds. Just a quick show of hands, who's been on the dark web? And I promise I'm not investigating anything. I'm not looking for anything. You can admit it, it's okay. All right, awesome. So as I said, the dark web has many different perceptions, and when people talk about it, there's many different perspectives that come up and come to mind. So we're going to look at the dark web from a payment systems perspective, because this is PCI that we're at here. And there are different themes that have been emerging over the last little while that I want to dig into, essentially, and explore, and then look at how we can use those themes or use the threats that are being assembled against us in the dark web to essentially counter and hopefully get ahead of the situations that we hopefully will not face against our systems, and especially as assessors and payment professionals give us a leg up on what could possibly be happening from a dark web perspective. So let's actually get into it here. All right, is this working? Come on. Look at that. Somebody's already hacked my presentation. It's probably up on the dark web already. It's for sale. I'm sure it's fetching a huge amount. Yeah, right. Okay, so what are we going to cover here? So first we're going to look at essentially how illicit actors, bad actors, whatever you'd like to call them, they go by many different names. They don't like me calling them these things, but essentially how they use what's out there on the dark web against you and how they assemble that. And again, we're going to look at it from a payments perspective. So I've accumulated some samples and examples for you of that. I would do this in real time, but that's a whole different story. We don't want to go that far. But we're going to look at how broad the threatscape is from even from a payments perspective or payment systems perspective, and explore the dark web from that perspective. And then we're going to look at how broad that is, as well as some examples of what's out there, and how easy it is to accumulate information on the dark web without a lot of knowledge. So look, I've been in this a long time. I've been in computers. I've been in IT for a long time. But hey, man, I'm not the smartest. I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed. I'll be the first to admit that. And even I can go out and assemble a nice collection of information that I could use to build an exploit. It's not that hard. So we're going to look at how broad that spectrum is as well. And then last but not least, since we're here at the PCI community meeting, we're going to look at how PCI, the DSS in particular, is helping to change the game. And there's some very positive, from my perspective, in terms of looking at what's coming down the pipe with PCI DSS 4.0 in particular, how that's going to help change the game. There's been some very positive themes, and I got to hand it to the council. They didn't pay me to say this while I'm up here, but there's been some very positive changes with the new standard that I really believe is going to help change that theme and give us that advantage over the illicit actors on the dark web, and how we can actually take steps to make improvements and secure our systems even more so. Okay, so with that, why am I showing you this? Well, when you think about the dark web, and you think about the threatscape, and how those threats evolve and grow, and how we're essentially possibly exposed from a liability perspective or a threat perspective, You have to look at this particular, this is one statistic that I find interesting. So this is a comparison between a lot of the information that we have seen for quite some time. If you've looked at, over many years, if you've looked at privacyrights.org or Breach Level Index back in the day, where they were tracking breaches. They were just basically looking at global data records that have been stolen, exploits. Now, that number has grown, it's well over 14 plus billion. I just put it up there because I've lost track. It keeps growing. Now, in the last 5, 6 years, I don't know exactly how long, there's another number that's very important, and it has implications to our systems, especially as it pertains to the information that can be found on the dark web. And that is, I pulled this from a source from Tenable, and they did a report looking at data exposure. So not even exploit. So the game has changed a great deal. And illicit actors on the dark web will prey upon this. We find many instances these days of access brokers that all they're doing is selling access to systems. They don't even care about the data, but what they do care about is that second figure there, that 40, in 2021, 40.4 plus billion records exposed. That doesn't mean they were stolen. It just means access was sold to gain visibility to those records. So now exploits and liability, you can be in trouble, essentially, if your data is at threat of being exposed. It's a whole different ballgame. And as payment professionals, I'm a former auditor, trained QSA, et cetera. We've all dealt with this. We have overlapping responsibilities these days. So we can use anything in our arsenal to help us understand and get a better perception of our security posture as we try to navigate the signal-to-noise ratio in our community, in our space. And that signal-to-noise ratio has been turned up by 11 at this point, because every day I'm reading about a new data protection standard. And by the way, I would have put the PCI Council up on this as well, because data security standard fits well into the framework of protecting data, obviously. We all know that. But there's a constant buzz that's being turned up constantly that we're dealing with as payment professionals in our quest, essentially, to protect systems and build our security posture. So we're dealing with a lot of different types of data protection standards that we either align ourselves with and our organizations with, or perhaps we need to deal with. So we have no choice. A lot of these are mandates that corporations and businesses have to follow. They have no choice. Okay, so now let's, I guess, begin our tour of the dark web and look at that. And again, I have only static slides at this point. If you want to see me after, we can actually go into the dark web, and that'll be a whole different experience. So when you think of the dark web, people think of this nefarious, scary, sort of potentially scary place where there's a lot of illegal stuff going on. The dark web is much bigger than that. It's a multi-layer environment. And we often forget how accessible the dark web really is, and also how in front of our faces it is. If you look at the 4th level on here, we often, I think most of us know if we're security professionals, but social messaging now is another layer of the dark web that you don't need special tools. You don't need an onion browser to get in and access feeds and such and look at information and sample information to be able to get access to a social media forum. Now, perhaps it's kind of exclusive. You might have to get an invitation. You might have to hide yourself and have an avatar and all this good stuff, and have a handle that's your dark web handle. But you just need an invitation into a Telegram forum that's talking about things, maybe point of sale or e-commerce attacks, and how to build those. You get access to that. That's not hidden in some deep, dark cave of the dark web. And it is comprising one of the many layers of the dark web. And there's also page sites, GitHub, things like that out in the clear web. These are accessible by all of us to a certain degree. So when we talk about the dark web, we need to make sure that, here's one of those we need to make sure statements. Press the easy button. We just need to do this. I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm just saying that we need to consider that there's many different layers to the dark web. And sometimes the information that we're seeking is right in front of us, and it's not very hard to gain access to. So multi-layers, the clear, deep, and dark web, and they all have different artifacts that can be very useful and that are very accessible for threat actors to use to build and assemble, as I said, those easy attacks, even for a person like me. All right, I'll stop cutting myself up now. All right, so we've heard of a New York minute, or in this case, a Toronto minute, or Toronto, if you're from here. Let's look at a dark web minute. So this is actual analysis that we ran at Cybersixgill and comprised a report because we wanted to essentially comprise a sample of what's out there. Now, there's all kinds of alarming figures on this. In 1 minute on the dark web, between you do a scan, we pull some information down, you do a scan, a minute later, this is what happened. There's tons of credit cards, there's tons of IDs and VIP credentials. There's a treasure trove of information, and it's staggering when you look at the numbers. Things are happening so fast there. But the reality of it is, this all pertains to the digital footprint that we are leaving, those digital breadcrumbs that all of us leave as individuals and as organizations. That digital footprint has been growing rapidly, and you think back to that data exploits versus data exposure graph that I showed, and that's a result of this type of thing happening. So the fact that I can gain so much valuable information in 1 minute on the dark web is a result of that exposure. There's so much data. Our data footprint has grown out of control. And it's staggering sometimes when I help customers and deal with different businesses. It's scary when they start to relate to you the actual size of their digital footprint. And I mean, they may have to have that because it's a state of doing business. They need to have that data. They need to stretch out into different facets of the web. However, we need to be conscious of the fact that in order to defend that data, we really, really need to take a different themed approach. Now, this is an old diagram that I've been showing for over 10 years now. I think it was in some of my other presentations when I have done this in the past with PCI. But the reason I bring this up is just to state one specific thing. That is, this is you can call it the exploit chain, the kill chain. We've had this around for quite some time now. But what is relative here is that those bad actors, people, assembling threats against us, building malware and everything else, they use exactly the same tactics that I would use. The only difference is they're using all that valuable information on the dark web. Sometimes I may not be utilizing that particular information, but they are essentially able to follow the exact steps that I would move across the exploit train to try to protect myself. They will follow the same steps, except they've moved up the chain a little bit more. So what am I stating here? I'm basically saying that when we consider the theme of how we want to protect our systems, and we maybe look at a framework and try to fit that into the kill chain or the exploit cycle, we need to do the same thing as the bad actors are doing. We need to basically go through time. We need to move into a preemptive state. And this is really the key behind getting ahead of those bad actors. They're using the dark web to exploit our payment systems. And that is, we need to move into a more prioritized state in terms of how we're looking at our threats. right? You've heard that a lot too. We need to be more proactive, risk-based approach, et cetera. And these are all good things. The second step for us is essentially to be able to essentially move into a prioritized state where we can quickly realize where those serious gaps are. And this rings true with many different requirements as part of the standard, as well as just a theme in general across the industry. So let's have a look at those examples that I was talking about and move on here. Now, this is a quick snapshot. It's actually getting a little bit stale now because, of course, I had to assemble the presentation, and at a certain point, you know, I had to sort of say, okay, that's it. I'll stick with this snapshot. So, but what this is illustrating is targeting of payment systems just in any given time. And it talks about many different things here. One of the things that I can pull out of this is the fact that this is an older, what I would call a negative zero-day vulnerability. So it's a vulnerability that was around, so Loki was referring to, it was from 2016. And I did a quick snapshot of activity concerning that piece of malware against financial payment systems and noticed that there was a spike. And this tells you one thing. Bad actors are going to take the path of least resistance. And they're going to use all those valuable artifacts that they have on the dark web to be able to do that very easily. As I said, it's become a very easy process. But just in one single snapshot, a couple months ago, really, we could see activity spiking around an old vulnerability that just happens to be working again because some new vulnerability has popped up and maybe it's not found across those systems. So then from there, I just wanted to show you how easy it is to go shopping on the dark web. So, and again, you don't really need any special access or whatnot. I mean, it doesn't take very long. These are examples that I pulled up very quickly within our interface. But there's a treasure trove of information. And since we were at the PCI conference, I wanted to I wanted to just do a quick shopping trip and fill my cart with some skimmers. And in 2 seconds, I have a whole different e-commerce existence of skimmers that are fully available for me with instruction manuals, with proof of concepts, the works, and it's all there for me in an instant, in that dark web minute. On top of that, there's a very helpful tech support forum available with many of these different forums on the dark web. And again, a lot of this stuff comes out of different messaging forums. So as I was stating before, you don't really need any special tool or access to get through to that. So I could very quickly say, hey, I'm looking for POS attacks. I heard that such and such retailers still using those older end-of-life systems that have vulnerabilities, these POS systems. You can go out on a dark web forum and just ask some questions, and there's a whole tech support for me. There's a whole support center called customer service. They'll answer the phone. Yeah, how can I help you? Oh, POS attacks, no problem. And it's all there for you. Examples. Oh, I'll send you this site. You can basically, I'll send you all the information. You get the full manual, how to assemble it, how to put it together, the works. It's all there for you. So while you're on your shopping trip, you're getting better tech support on the dark web than you would with some major commercial retailers. Or not retailers in general, but different businesses. Okay, then one other that I pulled up recently. Since I was talking about the Loki malware for 2016, I did a real quick search on those types of, I wanted to look around payment systems. And this is by no means targeting Magento, but it was when they end of life a particular version of the payment processing. And very quickly, I could find an entire encyclopedia of information with full running proof of concepts, proof of values. Well, proof of values for them because they're trying to sell this stuff. And I got everything I needed to be able to assemble that attack in that particular environment. So again, in terms of examples, there's a wealth of information that's, again, very, very easy to get to. And then last but not least, again, since we're at PCI community meeting, and our chief responsibility is payment cards, although I think that's grown a lot more than that. I mean, really, there's an awful lot of valuable information just to, if you're looking at any payment system, there's so much valuable identifiable information and user IDs, the works, everything else. But a very, very quick targeted search will pull up all kinds of information, and I can literally get it down to, I mean, depending on how targeted I want to do it, but with a very simple query in an easy tool within the dark web, I can get credit card records by the millions. Because that data footprint has grown so large. It's still, and you know, of note, we actually just did a report. I didn't have a chance to put it in my presentation. It was very recent. Well, we're actually seeing that PCI community, all of you, are doing a very good job because credit card theft on the dark web has actually dropped dramatically. But as you know, that just means that they're going after different types of data. Okay, so last section here. How can the PCI, the DSS in particular, and I'm going to focus on version 4.0, how some of the positive changes in there around prioritization, that theme of prioritization is helping tremendously to deal with this situation. First of all, some of the changes that I've noticed help tremendously to find those outlying gaps. Right? It's all about, you know, you go through, and I'm going to refer to requirement 6.3, the new requirement around patching and vulnerability prioritization, which I think is an extremely positive change to help with that theme. How that's going to help you find the real risk that's posed to you against the dark web, against exploits, against threats. And then how you can ensure that you're properly getting priority around those, getting the right priority around your vulnerabilities so that you can hopefully take care of the threat. So I didn't want to go through every bit of the new requirement, but I just wanted to highlight a few samples here. So industry recognized sources for secure vulnerability information. I think this is fantastic in terms of advice. And really, it's as simple as this. Use a lot of different sources that you have because we do have a lot of sources that are accessible to us that we can utilize to enrich. And that's the idea here, is enrich that, enrich our scans. And I don't even like to say scans anymore because really we need to have things in a proactive state. On top of that, vulnerability is considered high risk to the environment. So we need to be doing this in a continuous sense. And here I go again saying, here's what we need to do. It's this simple. But really, we've heard this for a long time. We need to be more proactive, and we need to be continuously monitoring our systems so that if vulnerabilities change, just like that old vulnerability from 2016 that has cropped up and is causing problems, we can address that and take action immediately. Then on top of that, we want to look for new systems and software vulnerabilities, because they're popping up all the time. It may be, once a vulnerability is sent into the system, is given a CVSS score, it's kind of a one-time thing. Now, when it appears again, you may miss it as an outlier, so we want to make sure that that doesn't happen. On top of that, this advice is golden from my perspective, because it cannot be achieved by the same as vulnerability scans. We got to get away from scan. And I think we all know as payment professionals that just doing quarterly scans is probably not going to cut it if we want to be more proactive. So we might need to make sure that we're on top of that. And use all the sources that are available to you. Okay. So let's have a look, the last couple of minutes here, on how we can apply this. So I'm going to do a vulnerability analysis from a dark web perspective. I'm going to use some of that dark web data to feed into my prioritization process to be able to see what I can do to find those outliers, and maybe even automate my, automation is a strong word, but automate my prioritization process. When you consider requirement 6.3 and you're going to prioritize those vulnerabilities, we're going to do it in an active sense. So I can very quickly enrich my feed of vulnerabilities with dark web data to be able to tell that, okay, actually my top vulnerabilities are a lot different here, because when I apply, maybe there's a POS attack or an old vulnerability that's being used in an exploit that's being planned. It's a dark web forum, they're discussing it, and there's been a lot of chatter around it. So actually, this vulnerability might be more risky to my organization, and I can compare that against all those top vulnerabilities that I would look at in my prioritization formula. On top of that, the most valuable part is that I can get a trend analysis and understand how this vulnerability has been popping up from now and again when I apply all that dark web data. I can look for the trend analysis against all different evolving vulnerabilities as well. And then last but not least, I can apply that to the process. So follow the requirements and the advice of 6.3 and use other sources that are available to you and move into that continuous state of monitoring so that we stand a better chance of basically getting the real risk of any of those gaps within our systems so that we can take the measure to make decisions fast, mitigate our problems and our risks, and eliminate our risk. So with that, I want to say thank you. I appreciate you coming to the second session of the morning. It was a pleasure to be with you, and I would love to talk to you all more. You can come see me at our booth later. Thanks so much.